Okay, welcome back everyone to my video podcast on the future of business and technology. I'm Bernard Ma, and today's topic is defining the enterprise AI era. I don't think we've ever lived through times where we've seen more transformative change happening, and AI is the driving force of today's transformative change. So I'm super excited about this. And to help me untangle this super exciting topic, I'm joined today by Sridhar Ramaswamy, who is the CEO of Snowflake. Sridhar, welcome.
Thank you, Bernard. Super excited to be here. This is going to be a fun conversation.
Yeah, I am super excited. I'm in London. Where are you based today?
I'm in San Mateo, in our headquarters.
Very good, very good. So maybe we can start by you giving us an overview of your journey. You've spent some time at Google, you founded Neeva, you are now the CEO of Snowflake. So maybe you can give us an overview of your journey and maybe the things that most excite you about leading Snowflake at this pivotal moment in time.
Thank you, Bernard. I'm a computer scientist by training, and funnily enough, worked in databases, both theory and practice, for my PhD and early research career. I joined Google early as a software engineer working on the search ads system. And of course, search ads was one of the first truly massive application of machine learning and AI,
Mm.
because the core problem of what ad to show very much became a prediction problem. If you could show ads that users liked, that Google could make a lot of money on, it was beneficial for everybody who was involved in that ecosystem. Um, I started as an engineer, as I said, and gradually grew to lead more of the search ads team. But over time, all of ads and commerce, this included search ads, YouTube, all of display advertising, the area known as DoubleClick, but also areas like shopping and payments and travel. So it was a pretty broad experience to be at the center of information, how people got to information, what they did with it, obviously all of it from a consumer perspective. And after about 16 years, I decided I needed to challenge myself, do something different. And that's when I started Neeva, which is a consumer search engine with a very different kind of business model. Our core thesis was that search could be done better. And that's an ambitious thesis. But as it turns out, sometimes you sort of have to head in the right direction, and good things happen along the way. And things like the revolution of large language models happened about 2.5 years into Neva.
Mm.
We pivoted a little bit and created the first truly AI powered search engine on a shoestring budget of like millions of dollars a month, not billions. And we really showed that you can create a very different information consumption experience if you used tools like search and AI and
Mm.
put them together. We decided to get acquired last year by Snowflake because we thought we would have more impact bringing the power of these technologies to an enterprise context, rather than pure consumer, which, as you know, Google has a dominant position in. And that's been the journey at Snowflake. Snowflake's core mission, mobilizing the world's data for enterprises, is an incredibly powerful one. And over the past 10 years, they have become the most respected data player. We call ourselves a data cloud, because we want to provide a cloud computing platform with data at its core. And many of the things that are new about AI and machine learning are ones that are directly relevant to how our customers think about Snowflake and Snowflake, the company. We're going to get into it, but this is a short synopsis of my journey.
Fantastic. Yeah, there's so much to unpack there. I'd like to understand your views on so many things that you just mentioned, but hopefully we can get into that later on. I've heard that sometimes in your private life you take on challenges like swimming to Alcatraz and back. I always thought that Alcatraz was inescapable because of the currents around it. So I'd love to know why you take on those challenges, and more importantly, how you bring some of those into your leadership role at Snowflake.
Uh, to me, embracing change is really important. It keeps you mentally young and fit, and it honestly also makes you like uncomfortable, and out of the discomfort, come realizations about yourself, as well as growth. The swimming is a more recent example. About 10 years ago, I decided that it was not okay for me to be gaining a pound a year, which was pretty much how much I was gaining as an adult. Most adults do this. So I decided to drastically change my diet. I went to primarily a vegetable based diet with some protein added, did strength training every single day, and dropped my weight by about 45 pounds. And kind of, I've mostly stayed there. That was like an important personal change. And it was a positive change in that it led to, I'm more active. I really look forward to the exercise. It keeps my stress level lower, to be able to expend that energy. But to me, it was really important that I went into that change. But that change, for example, required the creation of lots of structure. I had to figure out what I was going to eat, how not to be hungry all the time, how to work with great coaches so that I could do, for example, things like strength training safely without hurting myself. And that's a common theme across change, which is, especially as now a more grown-up Sridhar, I try to put structure. I try to do this in a way that is challenging, but not one where you go and hurt yourself. Like lots of adults will go be weekend warriors, go try new things, promptly hurt themselves and stop doing it. And so part of the wisdom, which is like, how do you engineer change? And things like swimming came, unfortunately, because of some of my rash decisions earlier in my life, where I've had multiple knee accidents, multiple knee surgeries, most of the cartilage on my upper, femur's gone, and that's part of the reason why I had to pick a sport that was low impact. But again, I've had amazing coaches that have trained me. I swim a lot in the pool, and I swim with a group of people like in the bay, which is at like 45 degrees, which is a little over 10 degrees Celsius. It's pretty cold. But again, you get the wisdom of people that have done it before, of breaking down a complex problem, creating structure, and then having more of a long-term view, so you can say you can get to some point. For what it's worth, I just want to swim from the Alcatraz to the city. It's a lot easier than swimming around the Alcatraz because the bay always has incredibly strong currents that are pretty rough to deal with. It's a work in progress. But I'm one of these people that's also patient. So I don't mind that it takes time. As I said, I like to break problems down. And change in a work context is very similar. You have to be careful about what is it that you want to change. If Snowflake is going to be all in on AI, how do we break that problem down? How do we make it an and where it's not like the whole company is pivoting in a different direction, but you say, let's keep the strengths that make Snowflake such an amazing data platform, and then think about how AI is going to make it even better. And then work our way through what are the steps that we need to do in order to do that. It is a social problem as much as it is a technology problem, and just working through things like that is sort of roughly how I think about change. I'll tell you one final thing. During my first 9 months at Snowflake, literally nobody reported to me. I was a singleton. I was hanging off in the org hierarchy, so I had to persuade the company to do things because it was in their interest. It was in our interest for a brighter future without anybody needing to technically listen to me. Things like that are a lesson in humility, again, about how to bring about change. You have to be an evangelist. You have to make sure that you present a bigger picture. It cannot be self serving, and it has to be mutually beneficial. So to me, these are all valuable lessons that you learn when you run big teams. You understand now how do you go about making changes both to technology, but also from a social sense and a cultural sense. And this is where again places like Google, with many amazing leaders and coaches, people like Bill Campbell or Eric Schmidt, have been so invaluable in my life to help just gain wisdom over how to do these things.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing this view into the personal Sridhar. That is super, super interesting. I wrote a book about the skills we need in the future, and actually it was really good to hear, because if I had to summarize some of the core skills that we will need in the future, it's about humility, curiosity, and the ability to change. And I think what you've just told us and some of the stories, this is what you embrace, right?
That's 100% right. You need the humility, you need the curiosity, and you need to be okay with discomfort. Not everything that you're going to try is going to turn out swimmingly well. There are going to be lots of failures. Look, I started Neeva, the company, with the ambition of being the next Google. I'm very grateful that we got acquired by Snowflake. The employees did well, and we have a big impact on the world. But from the original goal, it was not okay. But you sort of also need the humility to know when you say we have come far, we have tried a lot, but the future does not look as bright, and it's okay. There will be other things to go tackle, and taking a deviation is fine. To me, that kind of resilience in adapting to situations, or sometimes like adapting to just like failure. Let's face it, we will all fail. And it's important that we have the humility to accept that and say, like, I am more than my failures. It's really important for people to understand that, like, not all the successful things in their life is because of them. There's a lot of chance. You are not the sole cause of your success, but similarly, you're not your failures either. And so, how you maintain that perspective of a larger whole that's a little bit independent of the success and failure, to me, it's almost philosophical, but it is an important lesson to internalize.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think running Snowflake is not a bad gig.
I think Snowflake is an amazing opportunity, and I'm grateful every single day for it.
So Snowflake positions itself at the forefront of the enterprise AI. And I would love to get your take on what it means for Snowflake and how it differs from the broader AI landscape.
Yeah, this is a great question. To answer the question, we have to step back just ever so slightly. Snowflake was a revolutionary concept for solving analytic problems with data. By that, I mean doing different kinds of analysis. Of course, there's like dashboarding and reporting, but there's also machine learning, more complex use cases, data engineering that you can do with data. The original technical innovation that our founders, Benoit and Thierry, came up with was by making storage and compute orthogonal. When it came to scaling, you could create an amazing new way of thinking about analytic computation. That sounds a little abstract. Let me explain. All our life, whether it's for work or for personal use, I joke to people, if we want computing, we go and buy a box. Sometimes it's a PC, other times it's a phone, but it's a box. And that box has memory, it has computing, but it's pretty much fixed. It has storage. If you changed your mind and said, I really want more compute in my box because more people want to access the same data that's there in the box, you're out of luck.
Hmm.
You can't do anything with the box. You have to go buy a bigger box. And so the original genius of Snowflake was that with cloud computing, you can scale these independently. That's what led to the success of Snowflake. Over time, our mission has broadened. We want to be the data platform for all enterprise data. That's the reason we call ourselves a data cloud. At the bottom is the different kinds of data that we can support, but we also built incredibly important primitives that every modern enterprise needs. And these primitives are around sharing and collaboration. Every enterprise lives in the context of partners, whether they're customers, whether they are suppliers. And over the last 20 years, as these partners have needed to exchange information, they have adopted techniques like, putting FTP files. Very brittle, very slow. But what Snowflake did was we revolutionized that by saying people can share data in real time, cross cloud, and it's super, super easy to set up. And so these pieces, when combined together, lets companies create modern data architectures. A large company with 10,000 people simply cannot centralize all data. It's just too cumbersome. You cannot have, a small group of people responsible for all of the data that 10,000 people create and consume with potentially hundreds of millions of customers. And so there is an architecture called the data mesh. And so with Snowflake, enterprises can adopt flexible data architectures that strike the right combination between, centralize where you need to. There can only be one definition finally of how much revenue you're going to report as part of your annual earnings. That's not a matter of debate. It needs to be in one place. But on the other hand, the different divisions of the company might have their own Snowflake instances. That's what we mean when we say Snowflake is the data cloud. Um, and now, where AI just previous to that, machine learning becomes so impactful in this context is they let you do higher level things. This is where customers like Disney, for example, optimize the guest experience within their parks using Snowflake machine learning. And this is where now AI is beginning to play such a big role because we have so much of the most valuable data within an enterprise. We are now able to do things like, if Siemens wants to create a chatbot on all of their, they make hundreds of thousands of devices on the documentation for all of those devices so field technicians can quickly get access to it, they rely on Snowflake to be able to do that. If Bayer wants to give access to business information to business users that don't know SQL, they use a product called Cortex Analyst. So AI is making new things possible on top of the data foundation that we've been busy creating with Snowflake. And that also points to the most important difference. I look at AI and machine learning as something that enhances the power of the data cloud, is part of the data cloud. We are not a standalone research company. We are not OpenAI when it comes to training new foundation models. And we are not like a pure inference company. There are companies like Together or even the cloud service providers that provide these things. We think very much in terms of what are the capabilities that you need to realize the value of this incredible data estate that you've created on top of Snowflake, but also share it. Share it within the company, share it with your partners and customers, and you see how that journey goes.
Very good. You focus on the AI use cases that leverage your own business data, the data that organizations have, to then drive specific values in the organization, rather than looking at internet-wide data sources and pulling all of this together, right?
That's right. That's right. It's very much focused on how can AI enhance, expand the things that people can do with data that's on Snowflake. We are, of course, also expanding the kinds of data that Snowflake has access to. We released a cloud catalog, for example, that can catalog things that are sitting in, for example, S3 buckets. And so the base is growing, but AI very much is of the things that are accessible to Snowflake. How do we make sure that the things that are enabled by AI are easy to implement or efficient to implement? And we always take the lens of what creates value for our customers. The things that we want our customers to do start with what's the problem that they want to solve, and how can is AI really going to make that problem easier to solve? Is it going to give an alternate perspective to that data? Being customer centric is really important for Snowflake.
Yeah, I think it's so vital that you start with a business problem and you link it to your strategic challenges and opportunities rather than try to do AI for everything. The one AI that everyone's talking about right now is generative AI.
Yeah.
What would be your recommendation or your advice for anyone who wants to implement Gen AI successfully in their organization to add true value?
It's important to break that phrase down into what are core capabilities. And there are a few different ways to do that. One way to think about generative AI or AI models in general is that they offer powerful bridges between different kinds of information. To give you simple examples, um, we knew there was magic in AI when about 7 years ago, people realized that language models would be able to translate between pairs of languages that they were not even trained on. And so people would do things like train a model, to be able to do, let's say, English to French translations in both directions. And then they would train that model to be able to do French to German translations in both directions, and lo and behold, the model would then be able to do English to German translations on. And so those are like, incredible capabilities. But the generalization is that you can go from one kind of text to, for example, structured information. You can ask a question if you have like clinician notes that a doctor wrote after seeing a patient. You can ask a question like, do these notes talk about a migraine headache, and extract the portion that does that. A language model can extract that portion and give it to you. You've gone from semi-structured notes to almost structured information. Is this a migraine patient or not? And similarly, you can do things like sentiment detection. Or you can take an image and ask questions of the image. For example, you can do total extraction from receipts. Let's say you have restaurant receipts. It's pretty easy now to use a model to be able to pull out the total information from it. And these are kind of like this is a core capability. Models are also very good at going the other way. So you can start with a description of an image that you want, and you can go from there to like an actual image. So if you're in marketing, so those are like another set of use cases. Of course, among the most interesting use cases that everybody is excited about with AI is code generation. Believe it or not, I wrote a script on a flight from here to New York, no less, to be able to parse my weekly calendar and send me a summary of all of the meetings that I did in the previous week. It would categorize them into one-on-ones, team meetings, and one-off meetings, customer meetings, and it would send me an email. I don't know any TypeScript, and so I was able to use Gemini, have it suggest a piece of code, put it into a debugger, check it out a little bit, and then actually deploy the script. So it's sending me an email every Sunday night to be able to do it. So there are these kinds of capabilities with generative AI. Now, if you're a company, you need to start very much. You need to like have a mental picture of what is possible. It's now possible to transform different kinds of information. It is possible to ask questions. And if you use a primitive like search, which is part of Snowflake, you can figure out what are the most relevant documents in order to answer a question. And once you have this idea of capabilities, then the problems you actually want to solve become much, much clearer. So, for example, one of my team members this morning sent me an email and said, Sridhar, we have a chatbot. It has indexed all of the help text that we have, the FAQs internally, about what food can you get in Snowflake San Mateo, to what is our vacation policy, to what is the address of a Snowflake location. I don't know in Atlanta. I was there yesterday. Now, previously, you used to search for it using a search box. But with this one, you can ask a question, it gives an answer, it points to the document so that you can go there if you want additional information. So it's incredibly useful. Similarly, my team is building a chatbot that would let my CFO ask revenue related questions. How much money did we make yesterday? How does it compare to the previous week? But you begin to get an idea once you understand the core capabilities with generative AI, and then the primitives you can implement on top of it. Then you can focus on what are business solutions that can come from it.
Yeah, very much agree. So, what are some of the most exciting use cases that some of your customers have implemented when it comes to generative AI that you think, hey, these really showcase what can be done with generative AI?
The different kinds of solutions that people have done, people have 100% implemented. Chatbots are almost the bread and butter, especially a search index supported chatbot, because that is how you minimize hallucinations. That is how you minimize mistakes, because these chatbots use a document as a reference and then generate an answer. And so they make it much more, reliable. A whole slew of companies have implemented these. I talked about how Siemens is doing one. Zoom has done one. There are many such companies that are doing. That's one category. A different category, as I said, that people are really excited about is business user access to structured data. Whenever you have structured data, you needed analysts to write SQL. You needed them to create dashboards. And those dashboards, they do the job, but sometimes they're inflexible. It's very hard to ask follow-up questions. So companies like Bayer are very excited about being able to. They've deployed an application, but we have dozens of customers that are implementing chatbots on structured information so that business users can get access to data within Snowflake. A fair number of people are actually doing something that's the bread and butter of Snowflake, which is they are implementing data pipelines that use different kinds of models. So, for example, there is one bank that is looking at the FOMC notes. This is the banking committee that decides when to raise interest rates and lower rates. Everybody studies them. And so they basically get feeds of reports like this, and then they summarize them and send it to people. But that's done as a pipeline that runs every night. And so those are, and we now have several hundred companies that have implemented data pipelines that are using AI models to do different kinds of basically summarization functions, answering questions, and so on. So I would say these are applications where we can look at customers and say we can help you implement them easily, efficiently, and reliably. The last part is Snowflake's secret sauce, and I'm very proud of it. Anyone can implement a chatbot that can write SQL. But very few people can then come around and say, no, no, we will help you design a system that has 90+% accuracy, that has 99% accuracy. And so we stress like responsible, reliable AI in how we think about products. Beyond that, people are doing fun other things. You might have heard of things like agentic calculations, agentic systems where you can look at the output of one particular data source, go take an action in a different data source. There are a lot of prototypes. I think production applications with agentic systems are, still coming. They need human input to make sure that those answers are reliable.
Very, very, very true. Yeah, super exciting use cases. Whenever we talk about AI, it's also important to take into account regulations, the responsible use of AI, the ethical use of AI. I'd love to understand your take on this. How do you make sure that your customers use AI responsibly and in accordance with regulation? And have you got any advice for organizations that want to use AI to make sure they stay within regulatory frameworks like the EU AI Act and others?
I mean, first, I think it is important that every company begin to think about an AI data use policy internally. Because Snowflake is a data platform, this is something that I have been involved with personally from the very beginning. For example, we mandated very early that any models that we train needed, obviously, to only take data that that we had free use rights on, but we said they also need to have model cards so that if there is a problem with the data source, you can go back, retrain a model without the data source. In other words, make sure that there is data provenance. This is for publicly available information. We also decided very, very early that Snowflake was never, ever going to use customer data. data that customers have put into Snowflake in order to train AI models, unless the customers told us that they wanted to. We offer features like fine tuning. They take customer data and and take a base model and will fine tune a model, but that model is meant only for that customer's use. No one else can use it, not Snowflake, nobody. And so having principles like this is important. We also created tools like Cortex Guard, which will prevent models that are deployed on top of Snowflake from being misused for other purposes. They will basically refuse leading questions. They try to stay within business context, within business use cases, so that people didn't have to worry that people would misuse their models, produce horrible output, and things of that nature. Overall, regulation is evolving pretty rapidly. As you know, California passed a bill. I don't think it's been signed yesterday about AI regulation, and I think, like, if the regulations can stay, helpful. In other words, if it can be done in such a way that just does not involve a lot of overhead for a bunch of companies, but instead play useful roles. For example, I think it is a fair ask that images and videos that are generated be labeled so that it can be detected whether they are synthetic or real. And I think things like that have to be done with a combination of, like, voluntary industry efforts and a certain amount of regulation. And we absolutely should also make sure that existing laws that are against discrimination, that are against, like, producing hate speech in certain contexts, those are also obeyed whenever people use AI technologies. But for brand new things that are simply not covered by existing laws, I think there's going to be a combination of regulation and laws. We pay close attention to it. We advise our customers in terms of what is, like, their AI data use framework that they need to have internally. How can they make sure that their data is safe? So, for example, it's pretty dangerous to take sensitive data and feed it into a model to fine tune for even a particular company. Let's say company XYZ says, I'm going to fine tune a model, but they accidentally put sensitive information, let's say HR records, into it. There's no guarantee that cannot be extracted out from that model. And so it's really important that they understand that whatever governance framework for data they have within their enterprise is also followed when they're doing things like training new models. And part of what we try to do at Snowflake is make sure that it is easy to follow governance. For example, if you write a chatbot on Snowflake, it's automatically going to obey rules about the underlying table from which this information is going to come from. And so people that don't have access to the table will not have access to the chatbot. So these are some of the issues that people need to think through. It's a rapidly moving field. But overall, I would say the benefits that you can get if you're very concrete about use cases, the business value that it is going to create, I actually think that there is a lot of value to be realized using AI.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I still find it astonishing that how few companies actually have meaningful AI and data policies in place. At the moment, it feels like it's a bit like the Wild West, where I see a problem of shadow AI, for example, where lots of organizations don't have a clear policy. Everyone starts using their own chatbots and their own generative AI tools to drive productivity, which is a real challenge, I think, for regulations and staying within the law for lots of companies. The other challenge I see is transparency and making sure systems are not biased. How important do you see this in the development and deployment of AI systems? And what can we do to ensure that we increase transparency of these systems and reduce bias?
I think these are important questions, and I'll break them into a few different, categories. The first one is around, let's say, using language model themselves to create things like chatbots. In my mind, people should not really believe raw model output. People talk to models as though it's like a wise sage, as though it's an oracle. They're not. It's a language model. It's a statistical model. But if you combine it with something like a search index, you bring a degree of verifiability to the output, because you can write an answer and you can say the answer is supported by the text in this document and provide a link to it so that it can be verified. And the other thing that I would say is that every AI system, before it goes into production, needs to have acceptance criteria. Part of what sounds pretty silly, to be honest with you, about AI driven systems is, we talk about them as though they're magic and we can't question them. I tell people, absolutely, you already know correctness frameworks. If somebody were to give you, an application, you have an idea of what's right and wrong. If you got a search engine, what are you going to do? You're going to say, like, I'm going to try 20 queries, and I need to make sure that the answer to those queries provided by that search engine is right. I tell people you should say exactly the same thing to the chatbot. You need to have a software acceptance process where you know that it is indeed performing the thing that it is supposed to. And the same thing goes if you want access to structured information. It cannot be the case that you provide incorrect answers or write bad SQL. So that's at a base level. And my first answer is that just like in software engineering, we have an idea of what is right and what is wrong when it comes to how a system should behave. People should have the same engineering mindset of how do we make sure that the system is behaving as it should be. But there are more complex problems, especially when language models begin to control things like prediction models. As you know, things like fraud detection models have been around for 10 plus years. And they are very, very susceptible to bias, because depending on things like the neighborhood that you live in, they can accidentally get trained to say, oh, everybody from this neighborhood is high risk, um, because there is some other factor that pollutes the data and accidentally makes these models believe things incorrectly. Um, Now, machine learning has regulation. If you talk to banks, for example, they need to make sure that they look for bias. They have, again, techniques for synthetic data generation. They have techniques for basically doing holdout sets of specific categories to make sure that there are not biases. But on the other hand, if now agentic AI systems begin to call some of these machine learning models to be able to make decisions, you can get into very sticky territory. Let's say that there's a chatbot that you can talk to figure out whether you should get a new credit card or not. And let's say you say, hey, I'm 45, I live in this area, I make this much money, will I qualify for a card? Just maybe based on the language that you provide there, the system accidentally extracts attributes, feeds it to a prediction model that then says, no, Bernard should not get a credit card. All of a sudden, that becomes very, very problematic. But I would say this all starts with having a clear idea of what's the business application that you're writing, even if it does use AI. What does it mean to be right and wrong? And what are the different kinds of biases that can go into it? And how do we have a structured framework for actually testing these on an ongoing basis, not just one time testing, to be able to launch these into production? And by the way, a lot of what I'm saying is not rocket science. People have figured out how to do this for the past 10 years. We need to stop pretending that AI is magical, that it cannot be tested and questioned.
Yeah, I like that point. Snowflake recently announced a partnership or collaboration with NVIDIA
Yeah.
AI. Can you give us an overview of what that partnership is about?
So we have a broad and a deep partnership with NVIDIA. Things that we have had very successful collaborations on. They're very technical but important. We have collaborated with them on what are called embedding models. These are models that take documents and convert them into high dimensional vectors so that you can retrieve them better. They are the basis for chatbots. So we have worked with them on training state-of-the-art embedding models because they make chatbots more efficient in practice. All of our own large language models, like Arctic, for example, have been trained on NVIDIA chips. We are and we are very proud of that, and we collaborate with the team on how do we make training efficient. These are computations that take, like, it's 10 to the 21. It's an absurd amount of compute to be able to train these kinds of models. So we have collaborations with them. We're also looking into things like how can regular Snowflake computation. Snowflake at its core is a data engine. It's one thing to use a language model on top of the data engine. We're also collaborating with them on what's the future of computation. Can accelerated computing, things like H100s and B100s, accelerate how you can do massive regular data processing, not just language models? This is part of what I mean by there's a lot of breadth as well as depth in how we work with NVIDIA.
Very good. And you've talked about a number of amazing use cases already. I know that you work with Virgin Media, Sainsbury's, EDF. I'd love to know a few more examples of how they're using Snowflake's AI-powered data cloud platform to really drive innovation and value in their organization.
Yeah. As I was saying, Snowflake's primary value, is as a data platform. These companies use us in order to make sure that their highest, quality data. For example, with Sainsbury's, which is a big retail chain, which is their sales information. How are they doing? How are the core stores doing? How can they make sure that their inventory is up to date? A lot of these folks start using us for analytic purposes, and then more and more they are training machine learning models that can be more predictive for a slew of problems. I talked about things like guest experiences. You can work to make sure that, for example, the queues don't get to be too long, because you can look at times at times like that. Um, and on top of that come the AI applications. And as I said, they generally at this point fall into the buckets of information chatbots, access to structured information, and data transformation using things like Cortex AI. We have a number of partnerships with companies like Landing.ai, where you can now begin to look at images, extract information, from them, so you can begin to do defect detection. What's the quality of the food? Those are more advanced use cases that people are thinking about and experimenting with.
Very good. Yeah, fascinating examples. Um, Lots of organizations are getting ready for AI right now. You work with so many different organizations, and you must see some organizations that are getting ready in a better way. They are prepared for it. They are starting to leverage AI in their organizations successfully, doing data literacy programs, changing the organizational culture, and so on. What tips would you share with anyone listening and watching that would help their organization get ready for AI? What are your top tips in terms of getting the organization ready for enterprise AI?
I mean, first, I would say some of the more sophisticated organizations essentially have elevated AI to be on par with folks like the chief data officer, or even the CIO, because people understand that it's a transformative technology. And there is, first of all, I think, a demystification process that many companies have to go through. For example, with our teams, I routinely talk to them about just playing with the technology for simple things, whether it is to generate an image or to do some text processing. Very, very simple things. If you have a little if you have a little spreadsheet, for example, you can upload a spreadsheet and ask questions. Very simple things that people can do. Um, to me, providing access to language models, to good quality language models, so that people can get familiar with the technology is an important part. One of the things that we have done at Snowflake internally is we have created like a custom version of Llama 3 and given it for broad use so that people can use it. They can upload documents. They can do things with it without having to worry about, oh my God, am I uploading this data to a place where I have to worry about corporate security? And so having a sandbox that people can use, in my mind, is also a pretty important step. But beyond that, as I said, having this framework for what can you do with AI? What are simple applications? What are complex applications? Just going through an internal education process. By the way, we do both hands-on labs as well as broader education seminars for a lot of our customers, so that AI again becomes demystified. And so the more people understand what is possible, the easier things are going to get. And then, of course, I would finally say that people need to be very clear-eyed about what is going to create value versus what is just going to be a tie project. And going through that basic, just like prep work for making sure that this is actually going to create business value, in my mind, is also pretty important. And this is where, again, like places like we aspire to make that very, very easy. For example, creating a chatbot on Snowflake is 5 minutes of work, and you can decide if you want to deploy it more broadly or not. But to get a basic system working, you don't need to go by a separate vector index. You don't need to go by an API. This technology is rapidly advancing so that some of these basic applications become easy. I think that'll contribute a long way towards just demystifying the technology so that people can then think about more complex use cases. But the problem with more complex use cases is they're harder to develop. And you also, again, need to have a very clear idea of what's the ROI if you actually get it done.
Very good. When we started talking, you talked about your time at Google and founding Neeva as an alternative search engine. I'd love to get your take on the future of search, because with generative AI now coming along, are we going to be using search as we've known it for the last decade, or is this going to be transformed? And if so, what do you see happening?
Yeah, I mean, I think the this is probably the biggest change to the world of search. Let's say since the PageRank was invented and made excellent by Google.
Hmm.
Um, I think it has profound implications. Just like this, the world of information and media was changed in a pretty profound and not always great ways because of the internet. What the internet did was it reduced the marginal cost of distribution, the cost of getting a particular piece of information, a page, to another person in the world. It basically dropped to zero. And as you know, we are still dealing with the consequences of things like that, both in terms of the ad model that many, many people relied on, which became a race to the bottom, um, but also with things like local newspapers going out of business, because it's much simpler for a big national newspaper to spend a lot of money to get customers everywhere, and it's much harder for a local newspaper to survive. Um, at one level, I worry that AI is going to exacerbate this problem even more, because previously it used to be the case that you might click on 3 or 4 things if you are looking for something. With an AI model, you're just looking for a single answer. And so the web as a distribution mechanism for just human eyeballs, I think is going to shrink even more. and it's going to have another set of pretty tough consequences for information creators. Um, and but from again a pure consumer experience, I think AI powered search experiences honestly are just better. And these, like, people at Google, by the way, like me included, have known this for 15 years. If you provide somebody with an answer rather than 8 links, the answer wins all the time. That's the positive. It can be a better experience. But things like the ad model that is supported search, or the ad model that is supported content and media on the internet, I think they're even more vulnerable in this new world. And honestly, I'd be kidding you if I told you exactly what was going to happen. I think it is a pretty big churn. I think it is going to lead to even more concentration, and even fewer places of information. I think the consequences of those are a little hard to predict right now.
Yeah, definitely interesting times. When, as someone that is deeply embedded in this technology ecosystem and the whole trends around generative AI and the use of data in organizations, what are some of the trends that you keep a very close eye on? If we look a few years into the future, what do you see on the horizon? What do you find really exciting, and where do you think enterprises and managers need to look in order to understand where the future is going in terms of technology?
Uh, to me, I think the past 10 years were almost the initial phase in the value of data to enterprises. And the next 10 years are, I think, going to amplify this even more. And so, data strategies and data architectures used to be boring topics that the CIO and the CDO dealt with. But I think they are going to be the front and center. It's like business operations. Data operations are going to be the circulatory system of every company. This also means that making sure that it is in good shape, that people are paying attention to how data is managed, is created, what is high quality data, how it is shared, so that within a company, for example, people are not willy-nilly making copies of data sets or creating alternate ways to look at the same data in ways that are not aligned. And
Mm.
so I think having a clear data strategy is going to be important. There are very exciting trends in this world, things like interoperable data formats, so that data does not live within one vendor, including Snowflake, by the way, so that people can easily bring another tool to act on that data. They're gaining a lot of momentum. So words like the iceberg storage format, which only people that were deep in data used to know, has now almost become, common parlance in like the tech press. I think that is another trend that we are definitely paying a lot of attention to. We think of that as creating a lot of value for customers, and having one single data backplane, a data control plane, where people bring all of their data. Companies like Fidelity, for example, bring data from all of their operational systems into Snowflake so that they have one place in which they can look at that data. I think having a clear view for how you go about doing that is going to be important. And the final thing that I will say is that I think AI makes it much easier to juxtapose data with one another. What I mean by that is, it's very hard today. You need to do a fair amount of work to take data from Salesforce, which a lot of companies use for CRM, and juxtapose that, say, with data from Workday, which a lot of companies use for workforce management. I think in the future, it'll be much easier to construct joint views of this kind of data, but just as importantly, be able to take action on it, so that it becomes much easier to interact with applications. And then things like agents that can automatically take action when certain conditions happen, or the next frontier of that. But this gives you a picture, which is the role that data plays, How should you think about a data architecture for the enterprise? How do you go about assembling like a single data backplane that captures the things that you need to know about the entire company? How do you get that into the right hands? How do you provide better visibility into the data? And finally, how can you make it easy to act on that data? I think these are some of the things that are going to change in a pretty profound way over the next 5 years, 5 to 10 years. And honestly, I'm very excited that Snowflake is right at the center of all of these changes that are going on.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your time today, Sridhar. That I really loved those examples, those personal stories. Thank you for sharing them with us.
Thank you, Bernard. This was a great conversation.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. And for anyone who ever wants to rewatch or re-listen to this, simply head to any podcast platform or my YouTube channel. See you next time. Thank you, Sridhar.
Thank you.